Okay, so we just finished our last installment with Matt Wallden, and it was all about viscerosomatic reflexes. We went pretty deep into a lot of different things, but basically it's to wrap up the Totem Pole series, and we're going to have IMS 4 here at Corrective Culture coming this February, which is huge. So if you want to get involved, do your IMS 3, and if you've already done it, come to IMS 4.
Yeah, and Matt's coming all the way over from London to teach it in Australia at Corrective Culture, which is so rare. So if you're on the journey, definitely get your study done and jump into that, because Jake and I will be there. And for people listening, viscerosomatic reflexes is organs that hurt that reflect to muscles and how it can affect everything. How you're bloated, how your back will hurt. You know, those little patterns, and went deeper into that. Kidneys, lower back, all that sort of stuff. So it's really interesting. And again, with all his stuff, if you have a body, you can relate to it. So tune in.
Let's go. Okay, guys, welcome back to the fourth installment of our Chek Totem Pole series with Matt Wallden. Another week, another series on the Totem Pole, which we're excited about. So today we're going to talk about viscerosomatic reflexes, among other things.
Yeah, and that's a complicated word, isn't it? So
you should know it.
so how would you explain that to the people listening, like as an overview of a visceral somatic reflex, which now I'm really I feel I'm being pulled towards a little bit, because I'm really starting to almost feel that in my own body when I disrespect it.
Yeah, right. Well, the viscera, of course we're familiar with that, but that term means organs. And so when we talk about a viscerosomatic reflex, the soma is essentially the body tissues. So it's things like muscles, bones, connective tissues, that kind of thing. So somatic pain, for example, would typically be the kind of pain you get from a sports injury, right? And you say, oh, that's a somatic issue. But you can get visceral pain as well. And we've all probably experienced that at some point, gut ache, or, our lungs might burn when we've been running hard or something. So that's visceral pain, right? But the viscera, as a rule, are not very well innervated for pain, which is a good thing in some ways. And so we don't tend to get a lot of pain from our viscera, but they do have lots of sensory nerve endings in them. And so the idea of a viscerosomatic reflex, the best way because most people have heard of this before, so the best way to describe it is most people know that when you have a heart attack, you can get left shoulder pain. It's quite common that it starts out with left shoulder pain, or sometimes, people have heard of angina. And so that's often chest pain, but it can also be left shoulder pain or left arm pain. And that's because the heart refers to the left shoulder and the left arm, the left neck, sometimes to the right side of the neck as well. But so that would be a viscerosomatic reflex. So the heart isn't actually in your left arm. It's just your brain perceives it as being in the left arm. There's various rationale for that, and it's all to do really the system being an electrical system. So the nervous system is electrical essentially, which is why you can read the heart through an ECG, an electrocardiogram. Right. And so what happens with viscerosomatic reflexes is that it's in that order, because viscero means organs, so it's coming from the organ, but you're perceiving it in the soma. Okay, so just like that example we just gave with the heart attack. Can get it the other way around. You can get somatovisceral reflexes, but they're less common. So for example, you could, in theory, have something going on with a certain part of the body, and that affects the underlying organs. Now, the way that works, just to sort of orientate people who aren't familiar with the anatomy, is that the reason you feel the pain on the left side with the heart is because the heart is to the left side of the body, as we all know. And so the nerves that feed the heart come out of the left side of the spine, and they happen to be around the same levels that the nerves that feed the shoulder area and the neck area are. Okay, so that's why we can feel the pain in those somatic tissues. And so it's the same with all organs. To some degree, you can get referrals from all organs. So just a few examples that are well known in medicine. So the kidneys refer from, they say, from loin to groin. So from your flanks, the side here, sort of roughly where the kidneys are, round the side and towards the groin. Okay, so when someone came in to see you, you're trainer or a therapist, and they're saying I've got some back pain on the left side, and it's kind of on the left side, it kind of comes round towards my groin area, and straight away that should be a little flag or a flag to say, oh, that could be a kidney issue. We should look at that, and it could just purely be like a muscle strain or something as well. So just because the pain is in that distribution does not mean that it's definitely a viscerosomatic reflex. But if you hear that pain distribution, then you think, oh, that's interesting. That could be a kidney issue. So let's just explore that a bit. Are they hydrated? Have they had any kind of urinary tract infections recently? That kind of thing. So kidneys, loin to groin, heart's left shoulder, left neck. The liver refers to the right shoulder, typically. It's kind of trapezius area over the top of the shoulder. And then the pleura can do the same. So that's the covering of the lungs. So I've experienced this before. I don't know if you've ever had this, where I've just had a brutal cough that won't go, and I'm coughing really hard. And after about, a week or 10 days of that, I start to get an ache in my shoulders whenever I cough. Right. And that's actually referral from the pleura. Okay. So it's nothing to do with the shoulders being inflamed. It's the pleura around the lungs being inflamed. So yeah, I mean, the stomach tends to refer roughly where the stomach is and to the mid back. So most of these reflexes, they go to the part of the spine where the organ is innervated from, so where it's receiving its nerve supply from. And right down the bottom end, you've got all the sort of genitourinary organs, which can also refer into the sort of buttock area and down the back of the legs. So the uterus, for example, can refer down the hamstrings. The prostate can refer down the hamstrings. So, and not crazy common, but it's one of those things. If you are a therapist, it's really helpful to have that awareness for a few reasons, but in particular, to help diagnose what's going on and to help look for causative sort of drivers of people's pain conditions. Because quite often
it's cool. Yeah. Like you said, it opens up deeper questions, because if someone hasn't done all the check work and they get that, you could ask that person if they even drink water, and they might be like, oh, I don't drink water.
Fully.
Any stories that you have personally of that in clinic that was night and day, like when you thought it was that and you treated, I guess, the organ whatever way you see fit, and you saw the result in that manner?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the most common one by far tends to be colon or digestive issues that are shutting down the abdominal wall. And we often talk about it in those terms because it's a simplistic way of describing it, right? So it's shutting down the abdominal wall, shutting down the transversus abdominis muscle. And there's some truth to that, but what we have to be aware of is that there's more sort of technical detail underneath that, and so you can get kind of pulled apart by people that have a bit deeper knowledge of neurophysiology and so on. But before we go into that, the way that manifests, just so people are aware, is it's bloating, right? So most people have experienced bloating and might even experience it all the time, and that is normally as a result not of wind, which is what most people think it is. So let's say you react to, I don't know, like wheat, or it could be to certain beans or whatever, that you just know that you bloat when you have that. Rice is another one that commonly bloats people. And so people assume, because often you will get a bit of gas with that, so you might get a little bit of belching, you might get a little bit of flatulence. They assume that the bloating is just the wind, right? That comes about. Like beans is classic, right? Everyone knows beans make you fart, kind of thing. Well, that's true, but it only really accounts. So research into this, because one of the symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome can be bloating, right? One of the forms of irritable bowel syndrome is a kind of bloating version of irritable bowel, if you like. And when research has been done on those people, what you find is that actually only about 18%, so that's 18% of the bloating that they get is accountable through gas. Right. So when they actually do X-ray studies or other study scans to see how much gas is in these people's trunks, in their tummies, what they find is that only about 18% of that bloating can be accounted for by the actual gas. So the other 82%, so what is that? Well, what it is it's the muscles around the abdominal wall are being inhibited by a viscerosomatic reflex. Okay. So, and when we talk about the muscles, that doesn't mean that someone with bloating cannot go to the gym or cannot play their sport. Indeed, most people in our society are doing that very thing, when they go to the gym or when they go, play sport, they probably do have a little bit of bloating. Obviously it's not ideal, but the question is, well, okay, so is that really shutting down the abdominal wall? Because if the bloating was the result of the abdominal wall being shut down, then you wouldn't be able to move, right? Because the abdominal wall is absolutely pivotal, absolutely key in pretty much every movement we make, whether it be walking or running or twisting or kicking or punching or whatever. Okay. So, it's not shutting down the abdominal wall, which is the simple way to describe it. It's more actually inhibiting the tonic fibers within the abdominal wall. Now, just again, to orientate people who aren't so familiar with muscle physiology, you can basically break down muscles into two fiber types, tonic and phasic. And the tonic ones are the ones that hold us upright and very slow twitch, which means that they have very good endurance. But they also have a low threshold to stimulation, which means that they can activate really easily when we are healthy, but also they can get inhibited by noxious stimuli. So they get inhibited by things like pain. And that's been quite well known now for decades, that when you have, for example, low back pain, that it inhibits these tonic fibers. But also viscerosomatic reflexes can shut down the tonic fibers. So what you end up with is an abdominal wall that still functions using its phasic fibers, its fast twitch fibers. Okay, so you can still go play your sport, still go to the gym. The issue is you've got half the system missing, and you've got the half that actually stabilizes and that isn't going to fatigue. So you're using the part that isn't very good at stabilizing and that will fatigue early, and it's not as coordinated, right? So it's kind of like the way I describe a simple way to break down the two systems is that the phasic system, the sort of power fast twitch system that fatigues early, that's kind of like a big, strong rugby forward, right? It's kind of powerful, not quite as dexterous or coordinated as the wingers or probably the wingers. It would be the opposite, if you like. And then I normally describe the tonic fibers. Well, you could say they're like a winger in rugby, or they're like a ballet dancer, really refined, like really controlled, really great coordination, not nearly as powerful necessarily as the rugby forward, but super refined. And it's those ballet dancers that get inhibited by pain and by viscerosomatic reflexes.
With that, Matt, is that like when you say more coordinated, do you mean like is it more spindle cells in those, or is it? Yeah. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. So the spindle cells are what provide feedback from the muscle in terms of stretch. And so it's exactly that. So you got way more spindle cells. Just as a quick example, like the intrinsic muscles in the neck, particularly the upper neck, have between 300 to 500 spindle cells per gram. Okay, so it's kind of like, let's say 300 to 500 units of feedback per gram of tissue. And the quadriceps, big outer unit muscle in the front of the thigh there, has, I think it's 8 to 13 spindle cells per gram. So it really shows you the difference between the two. Like the quadriceps are totally dumb, right?
Yeah. And is that just like neural drive to the muscle? Is that just the feedback
it's from the muscle, right?
To the brain.
It's from the muscle.
Okay.
In terms of spindle cells.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, you've got motor neurons, and that you've got way more motor neurons. So motor neurons basically means a motor nerve, right? It's a nerve fiber that's going to the muscle to contract it. And again, you've just got way more motor neurons going to the deep intrinsic tonic fibers than you do to the phasic. So just trying to remember the figures off the top of my head. What I recall is that the phasic motor neurons innervate about 300 to 500 fibers each. So if a phasic motor neuron, imagine phasic motor neuron going into your glute max, for example. But when that fires, you get almost like an explosion going off in the muscle. It's like 300 to 500 motor units just go kapam, and they all contract together. But the tonic fibers, the tonic motor neurons, I should say, when they go into a muscle, I've got to try and remember the exact figures. Maybe I can send this to you afterwards as a, you know, a precise version, but I believe it's what I recall from my slides is that essentially it's like a 99-to-1 ratio. Is kind of the example. So it's something like 5 to 10 muscle fibers are innervated by a tonic motor neuron. Now, I mean, the exact numbers don't matter per se. It's just kind of giving you the sense that it's almost like a fuel injected engine, you know. So it's like giving you exactly what you need at exactly the right time in inner muscles, in those tonic fibers. And that's why it provides such great motor control, right? So it's brilliant for balance, it's brilliant for coordination. And it just, what it does is, if you think of a joint in the spine or a joint anywhere in the body, it could be a shoulder joint, ankle joint, whatever. At any given moment in time, that you want that joint to be in an optimal position to be able to move. Like it's got to be well controlled. You don't want it impinging or being overly distracted. So you want it to be in what's called an optimal instantaneous axis of rotation. So essentially the rotation within the joint or the movement within the joint is optimal at any given moment in time. That's what it means. And it's those deep intrinsic muscle fibers, the tonic fibers, the ballet dancers that maintain the optimal instantaneous axis of rotation. Okay. It's the rugby players, the phasic fibers, that then create the power over the top of that.
Yeah.
But if you've got viscerosomatic reflex going on, well, now the chances are you're going to, smack that joint about. You're much more likely to get impingements. You're much more likely to get joint distraction or traction or sort of torsion injuries through the joint. And so that's where injuries occur. People go, well, I don't know what happened. I just played a game, or I just went out for a run and now I've got knee pain. It's like, well, okay, well, we need to look into this. And of course, the classic modus operandi is, if you've got knee pain, you look at the knee, right? But we know, for example, that the glute medius, which controls knee rotation, gets inhibited by the uterus. So if it happens to be, the time of the month, or just premenstrually for a woman, and she's been out for a run and she happens to be a bit inflamed that month, well, she's much more likely to get torsional stresses through her knee. And it may even be biased towards the side that the egg's been released as well. So I mean, you can get an effect from the ovaries, so it's more on one side than the other. But most of the sort of viscerosomatic reflex you would get from a premenstrual situation is because of the inflammation in the uterus, in the uterine wall itself.
Wow.
That's cool. Paul just did release something on the hamstring today. Did you watch that about the runner with the
no, I
hamstring?
didn't know. I didn't see it.
Yeah, he's saying a runner had parasite infection, but he'd get like 3 laps in and he kept just pulling his hamstring, and everyone was looking at his hamstring and saying it was an inflammatory disease and things, blah, blah, blah. And then, he's had a parasite infection and was shutting down his hamstrings.
Yeah, wow.
So a pretty good example of viscerosomatic reflexes there, eh?
Yeah, it's a great example. And he's got another one he tells quite often about the Canadian, I think it was a Canadian skier, Olympic skier, and the Canadian Olympic Association have been trying to fix this guy for months, if not years, and kept getting these hamstring issues. And in the end, they thought, well, we'll try out this crazy dude, Paul Chek. And Paul just intuitively hit on the idea that perhaps this guy had some colon issues, and said, maybe you should do a colon cleanse. And essentially that was the issue again. Wow. So the colon will refer to the hamstrings. This is a good example of a viscerosomatic reflex. When I was looking into all this stuff, maybe around 2003, something like that, there was a paper I found by a guy called Viscera, and what he had done, I think he was a researcher into things like irritable bowel syndrome. And one of the things with irritable bowel is that, of course, you get pressure buildup in the bowel, in the colon. And so what they were looking at was, what's the EMG effect of this pressure buildup? So kind of what's happening to the muscles, EMG meaning electromyogram. So you're measuring the electrical activity in the muscles. Okay, so this is essentially it's like the electricity that's coming from the organs in sensory drives, because the organ's distressed in some way, like in irritable bowel. So you get all these increased sensory drives, so more electricity coming from the organ, and that gets dissipated into the muscles. So the muscular system acts like a dampening system for the visceral system. And this is why, linking it back to the totem pole, which we of course, that's kind of why we're having these conversations, is to link it into the totem pole. The organs are higher than the slave joints. Okay, so if you look at the image of the totem pole, you can see the organs are above the pelvis, and then below the pelvis you've got the slave joints. And so within that slave joint category, you'd have things like all of the peripheral muscles, like the hamstrings and the quads and the groin and the calves and all that kind of stuff. So when people have injuries in those areas, then what the model is showing you is that you've got to make sure those organs are functioning well, or you could be missing something, right? You don't want to just go straight to rubbing the hamstring or stretching the hamstring or whatever. So anyway, what was I saying about the hamstring? Oh, so this Buhasira guy. So basically what they did was they stuck pressure cuffs up people's rectums. Okay. They're kind of like blood pressure cuffs, but specially designed for that kind of body area. And they pump it up and they see what happens. And what they found was that so this is essentially, if you think about it, that's to mimic the effects of constipation, right? So when you're constipated, you get increased pressure in the colon, right? So this would be kind of constipation version of irritable bowel. So as they pump that up, what it does is it actually stimulates these sensory nerves in the colon or in the rectum, which are called baroreceptors. Now, we all know what a barometer is. It's a pressure receptor, right? It's measuring air pressure, barometer, right? Use it to work out what the weather's going to be like. But we have baroreceptors in organs like the colon, in organs like the bladder. So we start to get a sense for when there's fullness there and when we need to evacuate, right? So this pressure cuff gets pumped up, and what they found was that the EMG signal that went up the most was the hamstrings, right? So the hamstrings increase their tone when there's pressure in the colon. So exactly that story you're just hearing from Paul is that this person's got a colon issue, maybe a parasite issue. So for the Olympic skier, the story I told, that one is probably more pressure. From the parasite one, it's probably not pressure. It could be, because obviously parasites can slow down gut motility and so on. But also they create irritation. So they irritate the nerve endings in the gut, and particularly in the colon. And then there's a couple of mechanisms via which that could then create hamstring tension. The first is just a direct mechanism where, like Buhasira found, when you stimulate those nerve endings, the hamstrings seem to tighten up. So it could be a direct viscerosomatic reflex. And again, it's because that lower part of the colon has a similar innervation to where the hamstrings are innervated in the spinal cord. So it's a similar level of the spinal cord. So that's just a direct electrical stimulation, if you like, of the hamstrings as a result of a colon issue.
True, yeah.
That's pretty cool.
But there's also a secondary mechanism, which you guys know full well, which is that when you get irritation to the gut, it tends to shut down the abdominal wall again, the stabilizer mechanism of the abdominal wall. So what compensates for that?
The hammies?
Right? Exactly. So and this was, Barbara Hungerford, who's one of Diane Lee's colleagues, published a study back in 2003, I think, maybe 2004. And what she showed was that when people have inhibition of their abdominal wall, particularly their transversus abdominis, then the result of that is that the hamstrings increase their tone. Okay, so the hamstrings basically compensates. They overtake, they take over the role of the transversus. But then, now the hamstrings are trying to do two things at once, right? They're trying to stabilize, but they're also a prime mobilizer of your hip, and they're involved in, moving you forwards. So that's why people often will get hamstring strains, because their hamstrings are trying to do the job of two muscles rather than of one.
Yeah. Do the hamstrings have more of a what has more of a posterior tilt effect on the pelvis from glutes versus hamstrings?
Yeah, it's probably the hamstrings in terms of posture, and it's probably the glutes in terms of power. So it's I think there's a book called The Locomotor System, which actually has the sort of different let's say, sort of hierarchy of muscle actions.
All right, cool.
To get back to you on it. So,
Cool.
but I think definitely, obviously the glutes are particularly strong in terms of basic contraction.
Mm-hmm.
Hamstrings do have a little bit more of a tonic activation as well. So I think leverage wise, it probably also depends on what position you're in, right? And what the knee's doing, right? So there's all kinds of factors. If you're standing up and your knee's straight, then probably your hamstrings are going to be have slightly better leverage.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've got your leg out in front of you, like you would do if you're lunging or if you're running, then you've got hip flexion, of course, but you've also got knee flexion. So it will compromise it creates what's called a passive insufficiency of the hamstring. So then the glutes become more important.
Yeah.
So it kind of depends what's going on with the knee.
Yeah, that's deep, man. That's deep. So if in practice, you've mainly seen, well, actually, you know what I want to touch on that popped in my mind just before, and I know people listening would have been like wanting to ask you this question just then, is how you mentioned like rice is a common thing that you find bloating people, and that's such a now during all these like sort of gut health pages and whatnot, they'll recommend rice for its like whatever beneficial bacteria or whatever, it's black rice, or now some people are saying not brown rice, and now they're saying white rice, and it's just going around in circles, right? Yeah. But when I think of rice, I think of it as a less nutrient dense option compared to other things, and wouldn't have been in the evolution for as long. But
that's right.
But I know in saying that some people are fine with it, right? But like so in your experience, you found rice is one of those ones that bloat people?
Yeah. And look, when I was at naturopathic college in the 90s, there was this book, trying to remember what it's called. It was like a 2 textbook series, really deep nutritional stuff. And one of the key things I picked up from this book, which is brilliant, is that the most common, it was called Nutrition and Health and Disease. And anyway, the most common food sensitivities in the West are to gluten and to dairy, right? Or to wheat and to dairy, let's say. And then the most common food sensitivities in the East are to soya and to rice. Okay. And so what they conclude is that essentially, of course, each food has a certain level of allergenicity, right? So some things are more allergenic than others. But really it comes down to the sheer amount that you're having. Right, the sheer amount that you're exposed to, and the amount that it's processed as well. So, when you think how much you process, say rice compared to how much apples are processed typically when we eat them, then rice is more processed, soy is more processed, and so on. So the point being that, as Paul often describes, when you have something that is foreign to you, so you have any organism that you're putting into your body is not part of you, right? It's a foreign organism. So whether that be a grain of rice, a soybean, a chicken, whatever it is not part of your body. So hence you have most of your immune system lines your gut. Now, if you keep putting the same thing into the gut day in, day out, then the gut tends to become a bit wise to it and go, well, hang on a second, it's like the analogy Paul uses. It's like you're constantly invading a country at the same point, the same border with the same troops, with the same strategy. But if you keep invading at different parts of the border and you keep, using different techniques and different approaches, you're going to be more successful. But if you keep doing the same thing, then they'll build up their defenses right where you invade, and they'll kind of sensitize that part of the border, right? So this is an analogy for the gut border, right? And so in the description I just gave from this textbook, what you see is that it's really to do with how much you're eating of these things. So if you have a gluten sensitivity, this is a classic thing with clients. You have a gluten sensitivity, and your therapist or practitioner says to you, you've got to cut out gluten. What people typically do is they go and get gluten-free bread and gluten-free biscuits and gluten-free cakes and gluten-free cereal and it's like, so now what happens is they just become sensitized to rice, powder or whatever, rice grain, because that most of those things are made out of rice, right? When they're gluten free. or they get sensitive to corn. So in the US, corn is a very strong allergy as well because it's used so much, not just in terms of it as a grain, but in terms of high fructose corn syrup, so because they use that to sweeten most things, there's a way higher instance of corn sensitivity in the US compared to a lot of other countries that might use cane sugar, for example, to sweeten. So most of Europe will tend to use cane sugar, or beet sugar, but not so much corn. But in the US, it's all corn, high fructose corn syrup, and so the allergies there are just way higher.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and isn't that when you bring it all back down to a tribe and nature? And then you think about it's impossible to eat the same thing over and over again. The seasons won't allow it. And like you said, like I think I was getting, some people get stuck on like a circadian rotation sometimes instead of like just like you said, don't have it. Like if you're having whatever beef 2 days in a row, don't stress it. But if you're having it like 10 days in a row, then you'd start to think other ways. And 2 days on, a bit of this, bit of that, then beef again, as long as you're not slamming it every single day with the same thing.
And your body kind of lets you know too, eh?
Yeah, well, like cravings, man.
Yeah, you kind of like, sometimes you just like, fuck, I need a steak. Yeah. Or I want chicken tonight, if you listen.
And isn't cravings like, I remember hearing something, it was like an Instagram reel, but it was like food is information. And then, when you get that information, a craving is almost craving that information because it needs something in that again to rebuild whatever you need, and then you'll crave the next one and you crave the next one. And then I guess the argument against that is people will say, I crave fucking
brownies.
Brownies and shit, but they've had that.
And I had because we're starting the cleanse next week, Matt, and last night, dude, I had these wallaby bites. Have you heard of them? They're in the health food section. So I was like, I just
like traveling before, I think.
Yeah. And I thought, they're probably all right. Like didn't own it. And I had 2 of them, went and laid in bed, had a sneeze attack. And I was like, I can guarantee you if I go and check what's in them, they'll be better. Actually, that's not what happened. Jamila came in and was like, have you seen what's in them? And I just had a sneeze attack. and then I went back and I looked at it, man, like palm oil, high fructose corn syrup, all the worst stuff. But it got me. The advertising got me because it's like a healthy snack. And so I binned them. But like even this morning I had, it's just like so quick. These allergies, like
and I think that awareness is key, and it's just that awareness of like always self-reflecting of how you feel. I was just listening to The Power of Now on Audible because Jake did a reel the other day to talk about it, and it's such a good book, man. And it's he's explaining it, but just that, like, how do I feel after this? How do I feel after that? And if there's any symptom, just reflecting at least in the last couple meals, which isn't taught. It's crazy that's not taught in school. Like, I feel like shit. Wonder why? What did I eat today? Like, that's not taught, man. Like,
nah.
My friend went to what do you call it? I forget, but someone for his colon problems, and they were like, food doesn't matter what you eat because by the time it gets to your colon, it's already digested, so it can't affect your colon. and then that's when I feel like we're in a matrix or in like a like, is anything real? Like, is that and people think that's okay.
That's a fairly standard medical approach, right? This is why it's absolutely crazy that it's only really in the last few years, like certainly up to 2010, maybe even 2015, and still now in some cases, gastroenterologists know almost nothing about nutrition. You're like,
and it's what goes
how
into
can
it.
that be the case? That what's actually going, the whole function of that system is to digest food, and and there's such a body of literature around how different things affect the gut, different foods affect the gut, different nutrients affect the gut, anti-nutrients, chemicals, pesticides, all of that stuff that can irritate the gut. And yet gastroenterologists, who of course are medical doctors who've gone on to specialize in the gut, don't know anything about it. It's very, very bizarre.
So bizarre.
It's like, but when you understand the evolution of the medical industry, I was going to say medical profession, but medical industry is a better way to describe it. Then it all adds up because it's all about, well, how do we prescribe a drug for a given condition, right? Because that's the model, that's the business model. It's not how do we help this person with the condition, even though that would be the intent of the doctor, no doubt. but they're taught and they're trained that someone has irritable bowel syndrome. Well, we need to get them on prednisone. We need to get them on this drug, on that drug. This will help. And we've done clinical trials on that drug. And what we've found is that in 60% of people, this seems to reduce that symptom. But then you need this other drug to deal with the side effects of that first drug. And, and so, but that's the prescription. It's a this for that approach. And actually, a lot of the kind of lab-based functional medicine is a little bit like that as well. It's just doing it with supplements. It's this for that. So you've got this finding, we'll give you that supplement. You've got this bacteria, we'll give you that herb. As much as that's got some benefits, like all of it has some benefits, it's not dealing with the root cause of it. It's not a herb deficiency that's causing that imbalance in the gut. There's something underlying in terms of the way the person is eating and the environment they're setting up for that, let's say, microbe to overgrow. And so really we have to be careful, because technology can be quite seductive, and knowledge is quite seductive as well. And so you can get drawn into something like functional medicine. It's important not to lose sight of those foundation health principles and getting that right, because as you guys have probably experienced, I know Paul's experience is that more than 80% of people, if you just get those foundations right, then you don't need functional medicine. You don't need lab tests. You don't need supplements, right?
Simplifies it. It simplifies it. Yeah.
And I think about like how does qigong affect your magnesium? How does losing 2 hours sleep affect your B12 or all that sort of shit? You know what I mean? And and I think they're like, because a lot of them these days, their approach would be treating those foundations while supplementing. But I still wonder. I guess it depends what's up and whatnot. I still wonder if that's even the thing to do. You know what I mean? But then there's things like where they'll bring in, I guess, like colostrum. Have you looked into colostrum? I know that's a big thing at the moment for like sealing the gut and stuff like that. But I haven't
a little bit.
Like,
I'm no expert on it, but
that's.
And then you got like slow cooks that probably do the same thing, like short stock slow cooks, like simple healing. Joe Witten talked about like.
There's like these really unique ones,
ancestral like.
That's food. That's food.
I know, that's like it heals us. And I think like I got such a benefit from just like the simplicity of when I first saw Donald, and it was like, okay, just eat real food. Yeah. And all my shit symptoms went away. And I was like, fuck, this is actually quite easy and simple. It doesn't have to be so complicated with like blood tests and all this crazy shit. I mean, you can find some pretty cool stuff in that, and I back some of it, but like realistically, like you eat good for a year, you turn over whole new cells and you're good,
Yeah. This guy wrote in the other day. He I think he got a tick or some virus or something, and he couldn't eat meat. Like it would get really sick from eating meat. And then he just wrote in the other day. He goes, he's finally healed it, and he was having like raw milk and colostrum and stuff like that. Now he can have meat again. Oh, so whatever I guess he could have raw milk from the start. So even when you said then colostrum, really, then it's goat's milk, isn't it? Which is even a less processed version of a similar thing. But
and look, I'm not anti these things. I'm not anti supplements or whatever. I just think that we tend to go down that pathway way too quickly, way too easily, and not change the basics. I think that's the issue. I think people can't quite believe how simple health can be.
For sure.
I think that's one of the biggest sort of challenges for us to get our heads around, because we like to think we're really smart. It's a little bit like all of what went on over COVID, and actually if you just breathe through your nose and got some sunlight and stayed hydrated and sleep, you'd have been absolutely fine. Really, in the majority of cases. I don't know if you saw, I was talking with Karina yesterday. Karina Krebs. I think she's been on your show, hasn't she? And I was just saying that there was a study quite early in COVID from the BMJ which showed that the risk of COVID for the average person was the equivalent of driving 10 miles in your car. Okay, so you think how risky it is to drive 10 miles in your car. There's a risk to that, right? You could have a little accident, you could get a whiplash, you could die. Sure, but the chances of happening, if I said to you, look, back at the height of the pandemic, guys, I'm gonna have to ask you to go and drive 10 miles in your car, you'd be like, would you be like, oh shit, this is really bad?
Yeah.
No, because that's the risk, right? It's not a high risk at all. But that's not what the media led us to believe. And so, yeah, I think often we like to go into these sort of deep complexities, and there is a place for that, of course. We need people to dive into all of the intricacies of what these things are. In the example of COVID, that's helpful. In the example of gut parasites, whatever, it's all helpful stuff.
But now it's come
but
out
we don't
like
get too seduced by it.
Yeah, and now it's come out with the vaccine stuff. Like, I just wonder. I wonder if they're sitting there, the people that all got vaccinated, and like questioning it now. You know what I mean?
No.
And it feels pretty good to be right. I'm joking.
They'll pull up other studies. Yeah, it's like
I guess it's just the way it is, eh?
Yeah, and it's part of the consciousness of the world, because really what it's done is woken up more people than they would have been. It would have been the same as it was, really. So it's like there's way more people now that like it was. I remember you said it at that workshop years ago, man. It was like it was mother-father archetype, or to the medical system to us. We were the child and they were the mum or the dad or whatever you want to call it. But now it makes people like, is this person like right? Like, in every modality, like how you said gynos and shit, like these people like now people go to the doctor and it's, I remember 10 years ago, they weren't talking about how every doctor just puts a chick on the pill for the skin so much. Well, I didn't hear that anyway. But now it's like, oh, they just fucking wanted me putting the pill for the skin. Obviously, that's not it, But that wasn't so obvious for a lot of girls.
I guess it's definitely woken people up. Hey, Matt, it's like because you probably,
it's this. Yeah. I think the model you're referring to is it's called transactional analysis, and it's basically the idea that you've got an adult relationship, which is what we've got at the moment, right? We're just chatting, hopefully responsibly like adults, and perhaps every now and again I might go into a little bit of a parent role because it's an area that I know a bit more about the physiology or something, and then you become the child a little bit more. Okay, so you've got these three areas. You've got child, parent, and adult. And the problem with the medical system is that it's very parent-child. So it's very doctor is the parent, the patient is the child. And so the issue with that, now that's fine, because of course the doctor knows more about medicine than the average person in the general public. Interestingly though, they don't know more about health, right? They know more about disease, but they don't know more about health than a lot of the general public, which is, it sounds like contradictory, but it's true, right? And that's one of the points I make when people come on the holistic lifestyle coach training, is that in 3 days you can learn pretty much the basics and everything you need to know about health, because it's simple. But it would take you 7 years to learn about disease at medical school, right? Because it's very, very complex. So health is really simple. So I forgot where I was going with that, but
the parent-child role.
Parent-child, yeah. So the issue becomes if you're talking to someone like they're a child, then how are they going to behave like a child, right?
So true.
So they're going to behave like a dependent. So they become dependent on the drug. They become dependent on the doctor, dependent on the expert. If you treat them like an adult and you say, well, you know what, this gut issue, you could take some steroids for it and I can prescribe those for you. I can look after you. Or you could take some responsibility for this and you could start looking at how your body responds each time you eat this, or you could cut something out that's likely to be driving this, like grains, and then reintroduce it and see how your body responds. Then you can make a decision as to how you want to go forwards. So now you're treating them like an adult, because what you're doing is you're teaching them to fish rather than giving them the fish, right? So that's that sort of coaching model, right? Is that you teach them how to become aware of their bodies. You teach them what to look out for, what symptoms they might expect, and then they can make the decision as an adult as to whether or not they want to continue eating those croissants every morning, which creates the bloating and the sneezing, or whether they want to say, you know what, I'm going to have some eggs, right? I'm going to have something else that doesn't make me sneeze or bloat or whatever. And that's the adult level that you want to be working at, really. And then people can behave like adults, right? Because you're giving them that option.
It's funny how, like, all this is logical, right? This is all logical. but there'd be people that think like we're absolutely crazy, and this is a good example. Now it doesn't get to me anymore, which is good, you know. But a guy made a video on one of my videos, got some traction where I was assessing a guy and talking about anterior tilt and whatnot, and it ended up getting like over 1 million something views on TikTok and stuff, right? So now this guy's seen it, grabbed it, and then done a video on how anterior tilt doesn't matter, and
what, like used your video?
Yeah, and like he's actually a dude that's like local, man. Really? I don't know. His whole page is that's his content. Okay. He's like finding things. Yeah. And I'm like, I was looking at that guy, and I don't even like dislike the guy, right? Because I fully see where he's coming from. I go, oh yeah, this guy sees me as crazy because he's looking at this research paper how anterior tilt is in 85% of people or something, and they don't have back pain or something like that. And he thinks I'm crazy because like I see it as, oh, well, anterior tilt just means it stresses this area more than that. And if you were like an engineer making the body, you wouldn't really want it there. It wouldn't make any sense, you know? And how we've already spoke about this before, how it's a stressor. But just the full logic. But since it's not on that paper, this guy thinks I'm nuts. And it would sound nuts. He'd be like, what? He thinks he's better than all these researchers and shit? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
I can see fully where he's coming from, but I see how my point is logical, but his point's logical too. He goes, well, there's no paper for it. These guys say this. I'm not going to trust you. That's the logic. They're in PubMed. Yeah. So it's funny how we both are logical in our own heads and the world's just our own reality. But you said it years ago too. The truth is what works. That's the truth. Yeah. You know, so and when you get someone in there and they stick their bum out and it hurts them, and then when they tuck it under a bit better, it's like, oh, that feels good. I'm like, oh, let's see if we can like get you there for longer without having to do that all the time. And then they're like, oh, man,
fully.
That's the common sense.
It's all down to belief systems as well, isn't it? So you know, there's beliefs and there's knowledge. You know, so if you believe that posture can't be effective, so this is one of the things that feeds into that mindset that the guy who critiqued you might have is that, you know, you can't change posture anyway. Right. This is what the research says. Yet all three of us know, and anyone that's done the CHEK training knows full well, you can completely change posture because we measure it, right? We do it the whole time, and people's posture changes the whole time. Because if you give the right kind of stretches for the right people with the right, you know, durations, and you give the right exercises with the right acute exercise variables, the technique's good, etc., then we make changes, right? And that's just normal to us, but a lot of these guys are starting from a point where they say, well, the research shows you can't change people's posture. So really? Well, that depends who's trying to change their posture, right? And you know, how motivated they are and what they're looking at, because you could do all the right exercises but have a terrible workstation, and so your posture doesn't change. Because let's say, you know, you're sat at your desk for 8 hours a day with an upper cross syndrome, you know, slump posture, and then you spend 5 minutes each evening doing your prone cobras or your, you know, whatever it might be to try and correct that. Well, you've got a huge imbalance of 8 hours compounding the issue and 5 minutes trying to correct the issue. Right. So you always want to think about, well, to what degree am I compounding versus correcting? And so if you can combine an improved workstation, so you've got a better chair, better setup, better, you know, screen height, all that kind of thing, with the right stretches and the right exercise and so on, well, now you're going to have an effect. So really, but, you know, again, it depends on motivations, all kinds of different things. So yeah, it is fascinating that we can have so many disparate views. And like you say, to some degree, everyone's right. And I think that's why Paul often says there's a little bit of truth in everything. I think that's a Ken Wilber thing.
Yeah, so it keeps you learning too. Like if you're not always like so like arrogantly right, then you can learn more. And like I'm always okay to question my beliefs, because it's like, fuck, yeah, that could work, you know. And I want to listen to people that have researched their whole year and not just shut them out and be like, nah, you know.
Man, so, yeah, that's the skill, and I feel like pretty good at that. Like these people that I go and look at their page, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like
it's, you know, like you're not just writing them off.
Like, you know, Adam Meekins. Yeah. I actually started watching podcasts with him because I was like, oh, this guy's big on like not really corrective exercise and hates all tissue work and just wants like just normal strength and get him strong and regressing to progressing basically with strength. But I was like, what is this guy like, what does he have to say? And what's the universe? Like, I actually enjoyed listening to him. And then he was talking about a shoulder issue. He's like, I just always start like closed chain, then I just build up the progression and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, I'd probably do the same too, but I just look at the posture a little bit first and then like see if I can help that joint move a little bit better before we start doing that. At least at the same time.
Learn from everyone.
And also just when you have like, you know, say I remember this guy, a friend of mine, he was getting like a back and shoulder pain. When he slept, he'd wake him up at night and wake him up a fair bit. And his posterior capsule was really tight. And I know that's probably a symptom for a weakness, right? But when I get a ball into his lacrosse ball into the back of his shoulder, he can sleep through the night. And he goes, wow, I can sleep. So now he's regenerating for an extra hour and a half, which is they're not studying that. But again, that's back to common sense.
And that's what the Chek Totem Pole does really well. Yeah.
What's that?
That's what I was thinking. Like that's why the Chek Totem Pole does really well. Like it simplifies everything and puts it in an order where you can look at the sleep. Obviously, sleep's right at the top. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, he helped him sleep. That's going to make him regenerate, and then you can. That's the whole point.
Yeah. It all just comes back to it, isn't it?
And it just makes so much sense, dude. I think that's why we get great results. Like once you learn to trust that work,
Yeah, and I think look, one interesting way of looking at it is that we're storytelling creatures, right? This is something that Yuval Noah Harari, as much as he's become a bit of a villain in our way of thinking in the last few years since his involvement with the WEF, he is a futurist and he's quite an interesting thinker. I've lost my train of thought again. Because what did you say again?
We're talking about he's a futurist. He's like,
what were you
talking about? Like how the totem pole really allows you to think logically.
Our reality, how everyone's got our own reality.
Yeah, reality. Yeah. So, what I was going to say is that he says that humans are storytelling creatures, right? And one of the things that I think we all have to have is a story about what's going on with our bodies, right? So if you say, oh, well, your posture's poor and we can correct that using this, well, there's a story, right? If we say, oh, well, the gluten's irritating your gut, well, there's a story. People buy into the story, then it becomes part of their myth, part of their story, right? And so then they can embody it and start to explore the different kind of characters or archetypes that they need to bring into their life so that they can address the elements of the story that they need to address. So, with Adam Meekins, it would probably be athletes, right? The athlete archetype needs to come in because we're going to give you lots of weights, right? And he doesn't really buy into things like, transversus abdominis activation, right? He thinks that's kind of all been disproven, which of course it hasn't. It's just that there's been questions raised because it's not the only thing. Okay, and I think what Paul does really well is he has a very comprehensive story, right? And so we can draw on different parts of the story and we can explain that in a broader narrative than the average therapist who's perhaps focused on one specific part of the story, like functional movement, functional patterns, right? Functional patterns, brilliant concept, but that's just the functional movement part of the story. Okay, we do functional movement. Then you've got the lab guys and the functional diagnostic type approaches where their whole story is about the balance of the microbiome and which chemical is or not chemical but let's say mineral or vitamin is high or low or whatever, and that's a story as well. But once we get engaged with the story and if we buy into the story, then we can start to participate in that narrative.
That's cool.
Yeah, there's all conflicting narratives as well, like you're just saying.
Yeah.
So it is interesting. I think the more you believe in your own story as a therapist, the more likely your client is to get better.
That's true.
We saw that a lot in sort of manual therapy where, when you did that whole story around people's spines being out of position, like this joint's out and we'll click it back in. That used to be the way a lot of chiropractors and osteopaths would describe the spine. Oh yeah, you can feel this joint's clicked out of position. We'll just click it back in, which is a nice story. And it feels good. And if you buy into the story, you're probably going to go, oh, great, it's back in place. And there's this huge placebo effect. But actually, the reality is now we know that story is wrong. Okay. But still a lot of therapists use that story. Still a lot of patients and people in the general public think that something's out in their back because it kind of feels like that, and then they get it clicked and it feels like it's gone back in, but that's not what's happening, so there's this story, and it's powerful, right? It's potent because that's what we are. We're storytelling creatures.
Yeah, the mind is powerful. Hey,
man, I wanted to ask you if there's any research, or have you seen anything, just out of curiosity of mine, of like when we're talking about how like spindle cells and the electrical communication between it all, and how it's all water, and is there anything on testing like connection with dry fascia versus like hydrated fascia in the communication, like if there's like adhesions throughout the body? I mean, my mind would assume it would affect that, the electrical signal, but is there anything out there?
I don't know that there is research to that level of specificity at this point. There might be. I haven't seen it. What I have seen is that fascia is an electorate, and so what that means is that it acts in a direct current kind of way as opposed to an alternating current. So in other words, rather than having the sort of on-off firing that you would get to a muscle, which is alternating current, the fascia, because it's an electorate, it transfers electrical drive just in a direct way, and maintains charge, and therefore it's way quicker and more powerful than a muscle contraction. And there's, if you look at not Thomas Myers, what's his name, James Oshman's work. So James Oshman is the guy who wrote Energy Medicine, and he's written many medical papers over the years, but he talks about this and has various fascinating stories about how it seems that the fascial system is essentially an electrical system, and it's all about essentially being a kind of faster and more efficient system for transferring electrical charge to the parts of the body that require it. So, for example, to protect yourself, like if someone's kind of about to crash into you in a rugby tackle or something like that, then it's not just a muscle contraction that you use to protect yourself. There's some kind of other charge that goes through the system because of the perception of danger, and the fascia all tightens up even quicker than the muscles can tighten up, and you get protected from that hit. But yeah, so Oshman's got a load of research on that, and I'm actually just looking at a book at the moment which is talking about how the fascial planes line up very closely with the meridians, and that the proposal is that what the Chinese identified with the meridian system was actually the fascial planes, and the fascial planes are transferring electrical charge through them, which is what we would call qi.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And actually, man, this guy wrote in, and we were going to ask you this question. It's off random, but like Osgood-Schlatter. Is that how you say it? Is that how you say Osgood-Schlatter?
That's right. Yeah.
And then they even wrote in again because we forgot to do it the second time, I think. And they're like, have you asked him? So, like, I see that as bone being laid down there for a reason. And like, is it like quad dominance? Is it like, what do you see that Osgood-Schlatter as? Because I had it when I was a kid too.
Yeah.
It was really common. Heaps of us had it.
It's quite common. Yeah. I mean, primarily it's quad dominance. Yeah. Because essentially, so people who don't know what it is, it's where what's called the tibial tuberosity. So you've got the tibia as your shin bone, right? Top of the tibia, you've got what's called a tuberosity, and that's a little bump on the bone, which is where the quadricep muscle attaches into it. Okay, so it's kind of like a little ridge on the bone, which allows the muscle to really embed into it. But as a child, the tibial tuberosity itself, so this bump, is actually separate to the tibia. So it's attached via cartilage, but it's ossifying separately. So it's actually turning into bone separately. And so what happens as a teenager is it still hasn't completely ossified and fully attached or created a bony link to the tibia. So if you're doing a lot of sports in your teenage years and you happen to be quad dominant, which means, kind of knees over toes type lunging, which is why I have my concerns about the knees over toes guy, then you're much more likely to pull that tibial tuberosity away from the tibia, and so you get essentially you can get huge lumps there where you're actually pulling that tibial tuberosity further and further out away from the tibia, and it's very painful to kneel on. It's very irritating, inflamed, and what you need to do often is to rest it. But I've had many teenagers come in, and also sometimes people in their early 20s can still have it. And just by getting them to roll their quads and to get their glutes firing better and to train them how to use their glutes better in lunging and in gait and so on, it can completely reverse it really quickly. Now, that's not going to be the case for everyone because there's all kinds of other factors. Obviously, there's the severity of it in the first place. There's how much sleep they're getting. There's how their nutrition is. All kinds of factors that are going to affect the level of inflammation in that area. But yeah, essentially, it's a quad dominant issue.
Sick.
Cool.
Man, that's awesome. And fuck, this is one last one for me, and only because I was curious today in the gym thinking about it, and I was like, I'd love to just talk. Matt was next to me right now just to talk about it. I've been reading that kinesiology of the musculoskeletal system, and I've finished the shoulder section, and I've just been trying to think about everything that would hold that humerus back in the armhole, right? The glenoid for people listening, and I was wondering about like anterior deltoid. With the contraction of the anterior delt, I know it's anterior, but would it push the head of the humerus back in some sense?
Yeah,
it would.
It would.
Oh yes,
yeah.
Yes.
But
can't find that anywhere.
Mainly in a closed chain though.
Yep.
So right. I mean, it still can do in an open chain, but in the closed chain, because you can't push. Let's say you're in a reptilian crawl position, right? As you bring your arm up and load it, then the anterior delt is really going to be taking quite a lot of that, as is the pec major, right? As you push down, but you can't push the ground away from you. So what it does is it pulls the body in, which actually reciprocally drives the head of the humerus posteriorly, right? So it actually pushes the head of the humerus backwards. Now, if you're doing the same thing you could be doing a bench press, let's say, and you'll have a similar effect, but because you're overcoming the resistance of the weight, it's less certain what the dynamics of the humeral head are going to be, because you're actually kind of, essentially the humeral head could still move forwards a little, but when you're in a closed chain, it can't really do that.
Yeah, because I've been looking heaps at the deltoids, and like, it's it's hard to find that. Like I can't find that on most books. I can't find that on ChatGPT. I can't find that on Google, because it always tells me just the joint actions, right? It won't tell me those like secondary sort of like actions it has on the body, which is, I just got to get curious. And then if my app isn't completely accurate to what it looks like, it's like it's hard to tell.
That book's so good for that. It kind of explains like the action.
Yeah, I didn't know
diagrams.
How the bicep like stops superior glide. I didn't know that. You obviously know that, but I didn't know that shit. Like, of the humerus and stuff. And then that's what made me think of the anterior deltoid, because I was like, oh, it's sort of at the front. And I've just been like because most shoulder rehab programs don't really involve the deltoids, but I'm like, there's these big fucking muscles that are sitting over the top of it. Like they gotta,
they're like the glutes of the shoulder.
The go-to is always external rotator work. And I just get curious of why so many people's posterior delt get so tight all the time, and they get that little back of shoulder pinch, and you can roll it out, takes it away for a few hours, then it comes back. So I'm like, why is the posterior delt working so hard, or the posterior capsule, whatever it is, that's like constantly tightening up and pushing that head of the humerus forward?
Rib angle at the start.
Yeah, I play with my own body heaps with that shit, and it's like, fuck, I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Yours is a tricky one.
Yeah, mine's like, there's a subtle imperfection there. It's fine, but I know when I do strength work, it sort of goes away. But it's like, I want to pinpoint, is it my subscap? Is it this? Is it the posterior delt was weaker too, I've noticed too. So I started strengthening it. Yeah. So
one of the things you have to be a little bit cautious of with the deltoid is because the deltoid lifts the humerus. So you imagine you got your humerus sort of sat vertically and the deltoid over the top. If it's over contracted, it will pull that humeral head up towards the acromion.
Yeah.
So then you're more likely to get an impingement, a subacromial impingement.
Yeah.
Right? So often the deltoid is a little overactive when you're getting these impingement type syndromes. And so, rolling it out can help. But the anterior deltoid seems to be, certainly in Shirley Summers' work, she talks about using the anterior deltoid and activating that is a kind of better strategy than using the deltoid as a whole. I can't think of her exact rationale. But
right. Okay.
So
we
just need to be aware of that, I suppose.
Yeah. Because I've noticed that too with some people. You can get the ball in there and the shoulder impingement will go away temporarily. But I remember Susie was talking to me heaps about how she likes to use the middle delt for a lot of impingements. But I was wondering how. I was like, okay, maybe when it contracts, does the body of it push the humerus down? And I don't know.
Yeah. It can do.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all very subtle stuff. I mean,
it never ends.
You have to watch. Yeah, exactly. You have to watch each case as well. I don't think you can just say the deltoid does this to think that it's acting in conjunction with the entire rotator cuff and all the length relationships of all the muscles around that joint,
ribs, and
as well as, like you were saying, the ribs and So it's complicated, but the simplicity that you find amongst the complexity is that if you get the posture optimized and the breathing optimized and back to the totem pole and then you find that these things tend to start to optimize themselves, so you move towards a more optimal instantaneous axis of rotation and better length tension relationship around that shoulder joint. So there's definitely a lot of complexities, and we obviously do go into that a bit on the IMS4, looking at measuring different elements of scapulohumeral rhythm and that kind of thing.
That'd be cool. So you go back into scapulohumeral rhythm in a deeper look.
Yes.
Yeah, there's like 24 shoulder assessments, and IMS4.
Yeah, for people listening, remember February, hopefully February next year, get all your IMS3 and 2 and shit done, and that's gonna be cool.
Can they book that online yet? In the CHEK Institute?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I believe it's online. I after the last one, I did double check that they were going to put that up. So I think it's up. We can double check that. But the other thing I was going to mention is that I'm going to do actually a totem pole webinar. So obviously part of what we thought about doing with the podcast was chatting about the totem pole and then potentially turning some of what we talk about into some kind of ebook or some kind of resource for people. But the nature of a podcast, as we've just experienced, is it goes all over the place. And that's what's fun about it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not very, it's not very good for structuring let's say an ebook or some kind of resource. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a webinar, and I think it's on the 12th of July. So I'm not sure, or 11th of July.
Cool.
I'm not sure if this will be out by then, but 11th of July, we'll do it. So it's a good time for you guys in Australia. I think about 6 p.m. something like that.
We'll clip it. I think it is out by then, but but we'll clip it anyway and put it out there. That if it's not,
so that will be more of a rundown, like kind of section by section of the totem pole, so people can get a feel for it. And if they're keen to get in and join us on the training, then
100%. Yeah. Jack and I will be there. And
Martin, some Martin guy messaged me. Well, I know him, but I can't remember his last name. He's like, "Is it coming to Australia?" Blah blah blah. And I'm like, "Yeah, it definitely is." So I just wanted to confirm that with you. And I'm sure. Like, cool. I mean, we had a big IMS3 class, so
IMS2 sold out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Here.
Yep. That's IMS1 at ours.
Oh, IMS1. Sorry.
Yeah.
IMS1. Yeah.
So.
But it is. Yeah, it's growing.
I don't think people really understand how big of a thing it is to have it here in Australia, and how lucky we are.
Yeah, like you'd have to fly to the States.
Yeah, to UK or the States.
So definitely do it.
Yeah, if you can pull it out of your hat, get IMS3 done, and then also listen to these. This would help so much. These talks we've had with Matt. Yeah, if this is your first one you listen to, go back and listen to the last 3 because it'll help you a lot just understanding the totem pole and getting your head around it a little bit before you go in, because I feel like that helps a lot. Yeah. And also, like if you can do any mentoring with any of the CHEK guys like Matt or Susie or anybody, it really helps because you can ask those questions you need to ask.
Yeah. Awesome, man.
I think the nice thing about the totem pole is that you've got, you don't have to be an expert in all these things. It's having the awareness of how these things interact. So then you can refer to someone who is an expert. So I often will refer out to TMJ specialists or other specialists, you know, up that totem pole, like a behavioral optometrist or someone like that. And you know, if you don't have any of the CHEK training, that's not a problem. If you understand the totem pole, you can refer to someone like yourself, Jake or Callan, you know, who have that awareness, or Donal or whoever.
Yeah.
So that you know, you can together work to optimize that person's health and performance. You know?
Yeah, it's great. Oh man, I've been having some good results with the Atlas. I'm starting to get like a feel for it. I'm finally starting to like just like releasing everything I need to release, and then it's so malleable. And then I just feel like I can just get like that on pattern or off pattern. I'm starting to get the feel for it. And yeah, I've been getting some good results. Like got a 5 kilo one yesterday down to 1 kilo, like with one thing, and it stayed there. So I was frothing. Yeah, it's getting better. Loving it.
Excellent.
Yeah, sweet, man. Well, thanks so much for all your time on this series, and we're definitely gonna have to keep up these podcasts like in some way, shape, or form, mate. Every few months or something. I don't know.
That'd be cool. And just we'll have different ideas, and we can just put them out there.
Yeah.
Any ideas you have.
Cool.
And people listening, just write in and have some questions next time we can bring up, because it's
I'm gonna have to get you guys on my podcast.
Oh, would love to
it with my kids. So you're gonna get absolutely grilled by a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old.
Are you?
Man, that would be sick. I'd love that. It'd be funny.
Sorry, are you starting a new one? Like, or are you running?
Yeah,
you are.
Well, I'm kind of restarting the old podcast. So it was FC20 was the old podcast, and the new podcast is FC20 AI. Right. So FC20 is really just means from chaos to order. That's
cool.
That's the idea. We're trying to help people make sense of the world, as it were. So that's FC20 from chaos to order. But now I'm going to use AI to help me, because the issue before was like, you know, I just couldn't do it as kind of one-man band. I just didn't have the time to do it. Or with AI, I think I can achieve that. But the other element of that is that my son's called Archie and my daughter's called Isabella. So it's FC20 AI, because they're joining me. And what that does is it, you know, brings a kind of younger, more innocent feel to it, so that hopefully it appeals to some younger people, because they're asking the questions that they're interested in. But also it allows, rather than me jumping off and talking about all this technical stuff, you know, they can kind of rein it in. Go, well, hang on, what does that actually mean? You know, how do we actually apply that?
And it's like a counseling session too, like, and also to have like memories on looking back is so important. Like I feel with like, especially for them growing up, they can look back at it when they're older and be like, oh, that was cool.
Yeah.
I'll
be tuning in for that for sure, man. Yeah. Can't wait.
Sick. Yeah, well, we'd love to, man. You just let us know the date and the time and we'll be there.
Yeah, I've listened to every episode of your podcast, man. It was great.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it's super fun to do. It's just, as you know, it's a lot of time and effort, right?
Yeah.
So it's not just this time chatting. It's there's a lot more beyond it. And I know Harry there that does some of the work with you now. I don't know if he's always been the podcast, but it's fun, but it's work.
It's work, and it's work. Yeah, it's work, but it's also like we're at the tipping point. It's like it's worth it now, especially for you, because like you can reach so many more people. You know what I mean? Like,
and it's like basically it's almost like every episode is just a homework for someone. Like it's just so good. It's like you learn so much of each one, and they're sitting there, and students 20 years from now can go back and listen to the gold. Like
it's pretty nuts.
And it could be it's like homework for someone's mentorship. Could be like, listen to episode 4 of this, like, and then report back to me. What'd you learn? Blah blah blah. Like that's how you learn. It's so you can learn rapidly through shit like that. It's so cool,
without a doubt.
Yeah. All right, mate.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Keep in touch.
And thanks for coming. And we'll stay in touch.
Sounds great. All right. Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Matt. Fascia.